You know that old myth that a camera captures a part of the subject's soul when it takes a photograph? Well, what if that was not only true, but that it also worked on the spirits of the dead? If you were to enter a haunted house armed with such a camera, what might happen to you? Welcome to the premise of Fatal Frame, a Japanese survival horror game made for PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2002. In this game, you enter Himuro Mansion, a Japanese family home and the source of many legends. During the prologue, you play as Mafuyu Hinasaki, an aspiring folklorist who enters the mansion in search of his missing mentor, Junsei Takamine. To protect himself from the supposed spirits of the mansion, Mafuyu brings the camera obscura, a camera passed down through his family that contains the power to capture spiritual energy. However, when he does not return from the investigation, his sister, Miku, ventures into the mansion alone. After discovering the camera obscura in the hallway of the mansion, Miku becomes even more determined to battle the spirits of the house and rescue her brother. You are hereby pulled into a world of religious ceremony, human sacrifice, and a curse that has caused all the spirits of the mansion to remain contained within its walls for eternity. With only the camera to defend yourself, you are forced to wander the halls, solving puzzles and unlocking new sections of the mansion, all to find your lost brother. But why was this game so effective? What was it about this game that kickstarted a franchise featuring 7 main games and even made a cameo as an assist trophy in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate? With the re-release of Fatal Frame at Maiden of Blackwater for more modern consoles, I thought it was about time we delved deeper into this fascinating story. Welcome to the Scare Lab. In today's experiment, we seek to answer the question, why is Fatal Frame so scary? For as long as the human race has been able to tell stories, ghost stories have been a staple in our nightmares. From ill omens of impending tragedy to kindly visits from past relatives, the ghost story has been one of the favourite tales to tell on a dark night. These may just be for entertainment, a way to increase our heart rate and prevent us from sleeping at night, but they may also have lessons to be learned. According to Eric Lindbergh in his article, Why Do We Like to Be Scared? USC Experts Explain the Science of Fright. A good example of ethical guidance embedded in a scary story can be found in the Latin American tale of La Llorona. The spirit of a mother who drowned her children in a fit of jealous rage, La Llorona wails as she regretfully searches for their bodies, bringing misfortune to those who hear her cries. La Llorona subverts the societal norm of mothers as loving and protective, becoming a cautionary lesson for others to consider when they get angry with their children. The stories of ghosts are also prevalent in Japan. In his article The Anthropology of Fear, Learning About Japan Through Horror Games, Chris Pruitt discusses how Fatal Frame is rooted in Japanese culture. Games like Fatal Frame are steeped in traditional Japanese horror ideas and motifs. They draw upon imagery and stories that are common throughout Japan, and are therefore excellent candidates for cultural analysis. He goes on to explain that there is a long history of ghost stories in Japan stemming from the 2 major religions, Buddhism and Shinto, which is the religion depicted within the games. Shinto belief states that everything has a soul, and it is possible that this soul can persist in our world after death. He states, many of the most famous stories revolve around ghosts who linger in the physical realm because they died while in the throes of intense emotion. This idea, called onen, is that some emotions are so strong that they can reach from beyond the grave and manipulate the human world. Onen is a cultural concept in Japanese horror literature. If you think of some of the more iconic horror movie exports from Japan, Ring, the story of a mistreated girl murdered and pushed down a well, whose anger and rage towards those who wronged her manifested in a videotape that killed whoever watched it. Or even Ju-on, a story I've already mentioned on this channel, who states that the curse within the movie is a curse born of a grudge held by someone who dies in the grip of anger. It gathers in places frequented by that person in life, working its spell on those who come to contact with it and thus creating itself anew. This is a common thread within Japanese horror, and a common thread throughout these games. According to an article on The Toast entitled Scare Yourself Silly, The Curious Case of the Himuro Mansion, there are various pictures dotted around the corners of the internet that claim to depict the real Himuro Mansion, but none of them have a set source. Nobody can pinpoint where the mansion may actually be. But the fact that the game isn't actually based on a true story doesn't make it any less terrifying for the player, especially a Japanese player specifically. As Aaron Greenbaum writes in his article The Untold Truth of Fatal Frame for Looper.com, Zombies and monsters might terrify Western gamers, but according to Shibata and Kikuchi, the creators of the game, ghosts and dilapidated Japanese houses are what leave Japanese audiences petrified. And apparently these things leave Western audiences petrified too, as many people have stated that the game was too scary to continue playing. Clearly, Shibata and Kikuchi tapped into something that transcends the cultural border. But why are ghosts seen as the more horrifying enemy for a Japanese audience? Delving into Japanese folklore and mythology uncovered a wide array of spectres that each have their own backgrounds and even names. Even just scratching the surface and beginning a search on Wikipedia reveals a list of legendary creatures from Japan longer than the lists for England, America, or even the entirety of Europe. The spirit type that Western audiences may be more familiar with is the yurei, which is defined by Kazuhiko Komatsu in Asian folklore studies as referring to the spirit of a dead person that appears to people in the form it had when alive. A lot of the ghosts seen in the game will fall into this category, making them instantly recognisable to both Japanese and international audiences, or into the more sinister category of an onryo. Onryo is defined in the Keibuchi history of Japan as the vengeful spirit of a deceased person. This book also states, the onryo phenomenon was accompanied by the belief that spirits could be pacified even after the death of the person by rituals of exorcism. The use of the camera obscura would be considered an act of exorcism, being used to capture the onryo as they attack Miku. Another of the Japanese ghost types visible in Himuro Mansion is the hitodama, which according to Marvin Oppler in his article Japanese Folk Beliefs and Practices can be defined as a fluorescent light representing the human soul. In English folklore this is similar to the idea of a will-o'-the-wisp, a small ball of light that contains the spirit of the deceased. Within the game, the spirit is usually found when a ghost is defeated for the final time, echoing the last words of the unfortunate soul before disappearing into the camera. A haunting concept. So while it is obvious that ghosts are a common fear in Japanese culture, they are a common fear for most cultures throughout the world. These days it seems that a phobia of the supernatural is mostly confined to children, as most adults tend not to believe in ghosts anymore. However, it is a valid fear that some adults are still plagued by. A case study by Ricardo de Oliveira Souza in Frontiers in Psychology looked at 6 cases of individuals who expressed a fear of the supernatural and concluded that the persistence of fears of ghosts may lead to societal and familial impairments as well as financial losses. But why? What is it about the spirits of the deceased that inspires such fear? According to Dr. Alan Schwartz in his article Ghosts, Spirits and Psychology: A Halloween Story from mentalhealth.net, strictly from a psychological point of view and leaving aside religious belief, thinking and values, the tendency to have such dark view of spirit says a lot about the way our minds work. According to Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, everyone has a personality and defense mechanisms. These defense mechanisms protect the ego from overwhelming anxiety. One of those defense mechanisms is projection. Dr. Schwartz goes on to explain, this is a psychological term for a defense mechanism where a person unconsciously denies their own thoughts, impulses and emotions, and then ascribes to the outside world. According to Dr. Schwartz's theory, we fear ghosts because we fear that they are the most negative aspects of ourselves. As he states, the angry, spooky ghost is really the parts of ourselves that we do not like. We are afraid of our own ghost, as the saying goes, because it is the us we do not like. In my video exploring why Five Nights at Freddy's is scary, I discussed why we are uncomfortable in locations where tragedy has occurred. Francis T. McAndrew writes in their article The Psychology, Geography and Architecture of Horror: How Places Creep Us Out, it should not be surprising to discover that places that have been the scene of a death frequently become haunted places, and these locations are common settings for horror movies and books. The more gruesome and traumatic a death, the more likely it is that the place where it happens becomes tainted by the event. Locations that were the scene of executions, such as the places in town squares where gallows were built or where beheadings occurred, are often linked with ghost stories, as are battlefields and mines where men have traditionally died violent deaths. And as we are about to explore, Himuro Mansion was the site of a terrifying number of traumatic deaths. The storyline of Fatal Frame contains references to multiple different rituals, each one involving mutilation or sacrifice to some degree. Before I go deeper into the rituals carried out by the Himuro family in the game, I want to harken back to the based on a true story tagline. The majority of the rituals contained within the game are in no way related to actual Shinto rituals, and I will not disrespect the Shinto religion by claiming them to be so. According to JapanGuide.com, Shinto is an optimistic faith, as humans are thought to be fundamentally good, and evil is believed to be caused by evil spirits. Consequently, the purpose of most Shinto rituals is to keep away evil spirits by purification, prayers, and offerings to the kami. While the rituals contained within the first Fatal Frame game may loosely be within this category, they are in no way based on actual rituals practiced by real Shinto priests. If you wish to learn more about genuine Shinto rituals, I've linked a video in the description by NHK World that details various Shinto rituals, their purposes, and interviews many of the people who have participated in them. I've also linked an article that details many of the rituals in the later Fatal Frame games and their similarities to actual rituals if you want to explore further. Rather than discussing the fact or fiction nature of the rituals, I will simply detail the specific rituals done in the first game of the franchise and explore why we, as a society, demonise the concept of rituals to the extent that we do. Merriam-Webster defines a ritual as the established form for a ceremony, or more specifically, the order of words prescribed for a religious ceremony. We usually understand a ritual as a series of actions or words spoken to produce a particular effect, whether it is to appease a deity or provide personal comfort. This is a very broad definition, but a useful one. When you think of a ritual, the first thing you might think of is demonic human sacrifice, as historic events such as the Salem witch trials and the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s have formed the modern concept of a ritual, especially to horror fans. Think of something like saying Bloody Mary into a mirror, or the creepypasta rituals that have had a time in the spotlight. However, by the previous definition, even something as simple as saying your vows in a wedding ceremony is a form of ritual. But why is horror so obsessed with rituals and religion? According to thisishorror.co.uk in their article, Religion Won't Save You, Religious Tropes in Horror Films, the link between horror and religion could be put down to a number of things. Firstly, as horror films are mostly fantastical involving supernatural occurrences, it's easier to utilise religion as it ties in with that quite nicely. Also, the fact that religious texts are full of horrific stories of death, retribution, and bloodletting, so it's an easier fit than any other genre out there. This may also be the case when it comes to the use of rituals in horror. I previously mentioned an article by Tsukuyomi detailing the similarities between the Shinto rituals in the Fatal Frame franchise and actual Shinto rituals in history. And while the rituals in the first game may not be based on real rituals, some of the sacrificial rituals in the later games are. Tsukuyomi writes, "Surprisingly enough, I've read accounts of human sacrifice for kami in Japan from a little over 100 years ago. That might not seem like very close, but if you see it as what it is, sacrificing people so the gods are calm, that's too close to comfort when it comes to dates. According to a paper by Noritake Suda, Human Sacrifice in Japan, there are countless traditions of people being sacrificed for water deities in order to calm rivers that would otherwise destroy villages, boys and girls being offered to spirits, and people buried along with constructions to ensure they stand the test of time and are not destroyed." So, now that we've explored that, let's look at the specific rituals in the first game. Contained below Himuro Mansion is the horrifying portal to the underworld known as the Hellgate. Every 10 years, the Hellgate is due to open and a number of rituals must be performed by the Himuro family in order for it to remain sealed. The first of these rituals is known as the Blinding Ritual. A girl chosen as the blinded maiden during the previous cycle is brought into a room in the house known as the Blinding Room. The ceremony master then takes the blinding mask, a mask with 2 wooden stakes in place of the eyes, and forces it into the eyes of the girl, blinding her. The mask, covered in her blood, is then inserted into a doorway to blind the spirits and cause them to be weaker, to allow for the final ritual to succeed. Next is the Demon Tag Ritual. Within this ritual, girls who are at least 7 years, 9 months, and 25 days old gather in a room with the blinded maiden from the previous ritual in the centre. What is essentially a game of tag is played, with the blinded maiden catching all of the present girls. The first girl to be caught is then assigned the role of the blinded maiden in the forthcoming cycle. The last girl to be caught is then assigned the role of the Rope Shrine Maiden, and is isolated from the outside world for the next 10 years to prepare her for the Strangling Ritual. The final of the 3 rituals, the Strangling Ritual, is carried out to seal the Hellgate and prevent calamity. As part of this ritual, the Rope Shrine Maiden is placed on a pedestal, and ropes are placed on her arms, legs, and around her neck. The maiden is then pulled apart. Once she has died, the ropes are soaked in her blood and used to seal the Hellgate. In order for this ritual to be a success, the maiden must have been purified, cut off from the outside world, and be willing to die and sacrifice herself for the cause. If these prerequisites are not met, the ritual will fail, unleashing the calamity on the world. And this is exactly what happened prior to the events of this game. The idea that the rituals displayed in these games were performed by actual people or living victims is horrifying in itself. There is something disturbing about the idea of people so entrenched in their beliefs that they are willing to do anything to appease a deity, even if that involves taking the life of another. According to Peter Leeson in his article discussing human sacrifice, few practices evoke the shock and horror of human sacrifice, the purchase and ritual slaughter of innocent persons to appease divinities, and few practices seem more obviously irrational. Indeed, purchasing persons only to murder them to satisfy the bloodthirst of imaginary beings might be considered the apotheosis of irrationality. A person who is willing to murder for their religion is somebody who you are unable to reason with. You are not going to change their beliefs in the space of a few moments, so any argument you are able to present against the act is overruled by their devotion to their deity. In the context of the game, the people who are willing to perform these acts are now vengeful spirits, and their willingness to take a human life has not been dampened by their demise. Not only are the perpetrators of these heinous acts roaming the mansion, but their victims are too, and the Rope Shrine Maiden is the main enemy you will fight in the game. The only thing more terrifying than the rituals themselves is the knowledge that they failed, and all of that death and suffering was for nothing. One of the major reasons that the rituals failed is that the Rope Shrine Maiden, Kyrie, was not as cut off from the outside world as was intended. She caught sight of a boy through her window, was conversing with this boy, eventually fell in love with him, and was unwilling to die. The separation from society was key here in preventing the maiden from being corrupted, and, as such, an insufficient sacrifice. This is, unfortunately, how cults operate in the real world. And yes, rather than being a valid religious sect, the Himuro family is more closely defined as a cult. Merriam-Webster defines a cult as a small religious group that is not part of a larger and more accepted religion and has beliefs regarded by many people as extreme or dangerous. While the Himuro family are technically considered part of the Shinto religion, their beliefs in the Hell Gate and the rituals that are required are separate from that religion entirely, allowing them to be classified as a cult. So why are cults dangerous? In most cases, cults operate in the following ways. 1. They demand full and complete dedication to the leader or deity they worship. 2. They paint anybody who is not a member of the cult as evil in some way. 3. They claim to be of benefit to the world in some way, so those who wish to help others are likely to be sucked in. An article on Oprah Daily titled "The Warning Signs of a Dangerous Cult Can Sneak Up on You" lists the characteristics of a cult and how they operate, as described by a cult survivor. Most cults perform brainwashing tactics on their members, as well as exercising full control over everything from their diet to their daily routine. Stephen Hassan, a former member of Sun Myung Moon's Unification Church cult, describes the approach of a cult as the BITE method, with BITE standing for behaviour, information, thought, and emotional control. This is more thoroughly laid out in freedomofmind.com, but it is worth noting that these aspects of a cult also apply to the treatment of the Rope Shrine Maiden by the Himuro family. Cults are terrifying concepts, and have damaged people in their millions throughout history. In the names of the Manson family, Heaven's Gate, Jonestown, Nixium, Scientology, and many more cults than I can even name in this video, lives have either been taken or destroyed in the name of twisted religious belief. Whether they are born into the cult or are sucked in by the sales pitch, individuals are cut off from the outside world, banned from reading any information speaking out against the organisation, questioned and interrogated if they attempt to speak out against the leaders, and in more extreme cases, are convinced to take either their own life or the lives of others. While the events of the game may not have really occurred, the impact of cults on the real world is immeasurable, disturbing, and terrifying all in equal measure. I want to take a brief break from discussing the game here to provide some possible resources for this serious topic. If you suspect that either yourself or somebody you know is in a cult, and wish to find some resources for guidance and assistance in breaking free, I have put some resources in the description to help you. There are plenty of ex-cult members and trained professionals who can provide the support you or your loved ones need to get out. Now that we have explored some of the themes of the game, I want to concentrate on the actual mechanics of the game itself and why it was so effective. The first point to mention is the isolation of the player character. Humans are social creatures by nature and fear isolation, especially in situations that could be regarded as dangerous. McAndrew states, "We may lose confidence in our understanding of what's going on in our surroundings. Is that creaking sound upstairs just an old house pushing back against the wind, or is it something more sinister? When we're uncertain, the first thing we usually do is look to the reactions of others to figure out what's going on. Without others with whom to share information and reactions, ambiguity becomes very hard to resolve. When this happens, our mind may quickly race to the darkest possible conclusions. Hence it is no accident that the prototypical Hollywood haunted house is in a remote, isolated location, far removed from the rest of society." This is not only the case for Hollywood haunted houses, but also for Himuro Mansion. It is isolated, separated from society, and both Miku and her brother Mafuyu venture there alone. Like the iconic horror games of years gone by, such as Resident Evil and Silent Hill, Fatal Frame's controls are based on fixed camera angles. Fixed camera angles may seem a little frustrating at times, however their use allows for the game to have much more control over what the player sees at any given time, meaning that jump scares are easier to implement, and the player feels a loss of control that allows for fights to have that extra level of both difficulty and horror. This is especially the case in rooms that are extremely small with limited range of movement. A lot more emphasis is placed on the player's ability to fight the ghosts, as you are not able to move further away to prepare an attack, or properly dodge incoming hits. The room that this is the most frustrating in is the fish tank room, where the player is only able to move over beams to cross the water. This causes the player to be more afraid of these smaller rooms, whereas in most games, a small room may feel like a safe space, as larger spaces allow for more monsters and enemies to hide. In Himuro Mansion, the small rooms are the most terrifying. To top this off, Miku's controls aren't particularly intuitive. She struggles to turn, she is slow even when running, and the biggest enemy you'll encounter is the ladder leading down to the Hellgate. This increases that feeling of powerlessness for the player. As well as this, the mechanics of fighting the ghosts are designed in such a way that most fights in the game cause the player to panic. As you need to be looking through the camera to do any damage to the ghosts, your view is limited. You are forced to look around through the camera as some of the ghosts zoom around you, avoiding the viewfinder. You can move while holding the camera up, but it is extremely slow and does not do much good. As you are holding the camera, spiritual energy builds up, allowing the shots to do more damage to the enemy, and a special attack called a zero shot, or a fatal frame, does the maximum amount of damage, taking out some of the smaller ghosts in one hit. The only problem with this shot is that it requires precise timing. This shot is triggered when the viewfinder turns red, and this is usually only done when the ghost is about to attack. This means that, rather than blasting as many shots as possible, players are encouraged to wait until the last possible moment to strike, right when the spirit is about to launch their own attack. This helps increase the heart rate of the player, as the danger is present, and possibility for failure are high. In terms of the audio, the most striking thing about the game for me personally is that each of the ghosts you fight has their own warning sound. This can be something as simple as a particular moan that signifies which ghost is attacking you. However, there are three that are the most iconic. The first of these is the drumbeat, associated with the broken neck ghost. This is a ghost who attacks you backwards, with her neck bent in such a way that her head is completely upside down. When this ghost arrives, a particular drumbeat is heard. You will always hear this drumbeat before you actually see the ghost, meaning that you are on edge and listening carefully to make sure she won't sneak up on you. The next is the screaming that accompanies the blinded ghost. This ghost is the victim of the previously mentioned blinded ritual, and she wanders the mansion flailing her arms in front of her, screaming in pain and moaning, "My eyes, my eyes." The blood-curdling screams, once again, can sometimes be heard before the ghost is even sighted, and this one is much more terrifying, as the blinded ghost is one that is particularly powerful, and if you are not well prepared, she may be the death of you. The final noise I want to discuss is... This is the sound that signifies the presence of Kyrie, the final boss of the game. A seemingly innocuous noise, but one that causes panic for both the player and the character of Miku herself. Fatal Frame, or as we know it here in the UK, Project Zero, is one of my favourite franchises of all time, and actually one of the main reasons I started to love horror games. I dug into the history and context of this game as a teenager, and it is safe to say that this has had a huge impact on my life. My first cosplay was of Kyrie. Some of my favourite songs are Tsukiko Amano's contributions to the soundtracks, and the re-release of Maiden of Blackwater was one of my most anticipated game releases in a very long time. Many people have stated that Fatal Frame, more specifically Fatal Frame 2, is one of the scariest games they have ever played. And as a personal anecdote, a friend of mine once threw the controller at me as they encountered the very first ghost in the game. It's safe to say that the world of Himuro Mansion and the Fatal Frame universe in general is horrifying for a myriad of reasons. Now, if you'll excuse me, I will close the lab for now and lock this camera in the most secure safe I can find. Thank you so much for joining me in the Scare Lab today. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed, share with your friends, and be sure to follow me over on Twitch if you want to witness some of my real-time reactions to horror games that I am playing for the first time. I hope to see you for the next experiment. Take care and be safe out there.